Men. A young general, barely 27 years old, stands atop a ridge, coat whipping in the wind, his eyes locked on the enemy line. The Austrians are retreating. Again, they said he was too young, too ambitious, too reckless. But now, Napoleon Bonaparte is rewriting the rules of war. Before he became an emperor, Napoleon became a legend. It's 1796. Revolutionary France is surrounded by enemies. The army in Italy is starving, demoralized, and poorly led. Paris sends a relatively unknown general to take command, Napoleon Bonaparte. Within days, everything changes. At Lodi, he faces a well-defended Austrian position across a narrow bridge over the Adda River. Artillery rains down. The bridge is a death trap. Officers hesitate. Napoleon doesn't. He rides to the front, he draws his sword, and with bullets slicing the air, he leads the charge himself. The French storm the bridge and the Austrians flee. Napoleon's courage becomes legendary. His soldiers begin calling him the Little Corporal, not as an insult, but as a term of fierce respect. It's at Lodi that Napoleon claims he first saw himself destined for greatness, not as a general, as a ruler. Just months later, Napoleon faces another critical moment. The Austrians are regrouping. If they retake northern Italy, France's gains will vanish. Enter the Battle of Arcole. The terrain is a nightmare: swamps, narrow causeways, and flooded marshland. Napoleon's plan? Outflank the Austrians by crossing a tiny wooden bridge under fire. For 3 days, the fighting is brutal. Mud, water, and blood blend together. Again, Napoleon leads from the front. At one point, he grabs a flag and tries to rally his men across the bridge until he's nearly shot and dragged into the swamp by his own aides to prevent him from dying. But the maneuver works. The Austrians fall back. It's not just a win, it's a masterpiece of improvisation and daring. Napoleon turns a bog into a battlefield, and a battlefield into a legend. Fast forward to 1805. Napoleon is no longer a general. He's an emperor. But Europe still doesn't believe in his empire. Austria, Russia, and Britain form the Third Coalition to bring him down. Napoleon responds with one of the greatest military maneuvers in history. On December 2nd, the first anniversary of his coronation, he lures the Austrians and Russians into a trap at Austerlitz. The battlefield is covered in mist. Napoleon pretends to be weak on his right flank, inviting the Allies to attack there. They do. But the weakness is a deception. As the Allies stretch their lines to exploit it, Napoleon strikes at their center with devastating force. His army splits the enemy in two. Entire divisions collapse. The sun of Austerlitz rises, both literally and symbolically. By the end of the day, over 30,000 Allied troops are dead or captured. The Holy Roman Empire dissolves. Europe is stunned. Even Napoleon's enemies call it a masterpiece. One Russian officer wrote, "It was not a battle. It was a war terminated by a single blow." Just before Austerlitz, Napoleon pulls off another dazzling trick, the Ulm campaign. Facing an Austrian army under General Mack, Napoleon executes a maneuver so precise, it feels more like chess than war. He marches his men over 200 miles in less than 3 weeks, crossing rivers and mountain passes to encircle the Austrians at Ulm without firing a single major shot. Mack surrenders 30,000 troops without a pitched battle. It's a triumph of logistics, deception, and speed. The world realizes that Napoleon's armies don't just fight hard, they move faster than anyone imagined possible. Next, Napoleon turns to Prussia. The Prussian army still believes it's the greatest in Europe, a legacy of Frederick the Great. But it's slow, outdated, and arrogant. Napoleon exploits every weakness. At Jena and Auerstedt, 2 simultaneous battles are fought on the same day. Napoleon personally commands the forces at Jena, while Marshal Davout, against all odds, defeats a larger Prussian force at Auerstedt. Next, Napoleon turns to Prussia. The Prussian army still believes it's the greatest in Europe, a legacy of Frederick the Great. But it's slow, outdated, and arrogant. Napoleon exploits every weakness. At Jena and Austerlitz, two simultaneous battles are fought on the same day. Napoleon personally commands the forces at Jena, while Marshal Davout, against all odds, defeats a larger Prussian force at Austerlitz. Then comes Friedland, where Napoleon faces the Russians in a battle that will decide the fate of Eastern Europe. It's June 1807. The Russian army crosses the Alle River, thinking they can strike Napoleon's forces before they're fully assembled. They're wrong. Napoleon arrives quickly, pins the Russians against the river, and unleashes a massive attack. The Russians are cornered, the bridges burn, and their escape becomes impossible. It's a slaughter. The defeat leads directly to the treaties of Tilsit, where the Russian Tsar, once Napoleon's fiercest enemy, shakes hands with him on a raft in the middle of a river, acknowledging his dominance over Europe. But no empire rises forever. After Friedland, Napoleon is at the height of his power. He has redrawn the map of Europe, toppled monarchies, and humbled ancient powers. Yet within a few short years, his campaigns in Spain and Russia will overextend him. His enemies will adapt. His luck and his genius will begin to fade. Still, for over a decade, Napoleon reshaped warfare with a combination of speed, deception, personal charisma, and brutal precision. From Lodi to Austerlitz, Ulm to Friedland, his victories weren't just military successes, they were symphonies of strategy, audacity, and iron will. Napoleon once said, "In war, the moral is to the physical as 3 is to 1. He didn't just conquer with cannons, he conquered with belief. His soldiers believed they were fighting for history, for France, for him. And centuries later, we still study his greatest victories, not just for their tactics, but for the man who defied the world and nearly won.